Hello everyone, how's it going? We're going to get started. Welcome to, this is chapter 3 for AP World History Modern. So a couple things you want to have before we get started. If you can, a copy of this PowerPoint would be nice. I'm taking notes on it. I don't know about you, it helps me to have notes in front of me so I'm not just copying what's on the screen. So this PowerPoint is in Module 2 on the chapter 3 page. For early China. So if you can print it, condense it down to, maybe 4 to 6 slides a page, and then I would just take notes on it because that's what I'm going to be using for the lecture. Also, if you have your chapter questions, if you've started working on them, or even if you haven't, I will be touching on a lot of them. So again, working smarter, not harder, using that motto, especially working online and stuff like that, making sure you're being accurate, prepping for your test. I would print that off and have that because I will be touching on that as we go and referencing that. So having those two things will definitely help. And then a third thing, if you want to have it, is the Mandate of Heaven. We will be talking about the Mandate of Heaven today. So that primary resource that we'll be doing in your second live session for this module, having that will also be helpful because we will be talking about the basic concepts of the Mandate of Heaven, and so it'll help tie in a little bit to understanding that document a little bit more in this chapter. Okay, so with no further ado, let's get started. Chapter 3 is kind of a continuation of Chapter 2 in that we're extending the conversation of early civilization. So in Chapter 2, we talked about 3 early civilizations. Can you remember what those 3 were? So think about it for a second, if you can, off the top of your head. So there was Indus Valley, Mesopotamia, which, remember, Mesopotamia was a collection of city-states that were decentralized, and then Egypt, right? Okay, and Indus Valley kind of disappeared without a trace. Mesopotamia was the crossroads of the world, a lot of confrontation, but also a very advanced, Babylon being the most advanced of those, and then Egypt probably being the most peaceful because they were unified under a pharaoh. Okay, commonality that we see of civilization, some of those characteristics of a civilization that we've talked about. Let's review that really quick. There were 7 or 8. Centralized government, religion, writing system, kind of number these off on your fingers. Okay, social hierarchy, job specialization, domestication of animals, agriculture, irrigation, permanent settlements, writing systems, common tongue or language. So those are the kind of things that you're going to see all these early civilizations have in common. So continuing that conversation, we're going to talk about kind of one of the last considered early civilizations, and that will be early China. Now, remember when we looked at that original map, and they all were developed along similar lines of latitude, similar environments. Okay, they all established along rivers. They all established. Sorry, that was a yawn. I apologize. I'm going to pep it up here a little bit, all right, because I'm recording this a little bit early in the morning, so who knows what type of day you're listening to this. It's tough. But they all established along rivers. So China is going to be no different, and China is going to establish what's going to make China different from the other 3 is the other 3 will have contact with one another. Indus, Mesopotamia, and Egypt, while separate civilizations, will have contact with one another because of trade. There will be an interdependence that they have in one another. And so when one falls, we'll actually kind of see them that impact one another. In the end of the Bronze Age, they will kind of bring an end to all of them. China, not the case. China is going to establish an isolation, and that isolation is going to be a positive and a negative. Okay, a positive in that they're not interdependent on those around them, but a negative in that they're not aware of those, around them, and that will establish their development in a different way. China is going to be a very flourishing environment, okay? But like I said, they will establish in relative isolation compared to the other civilizations, meaning they did not have contact with other civilizations. Now, they will have contact with people, but when we define people, that's different from being civilized. They had a lot of physical barriers around them. Now, when you look at the physical landscape of what we call China today, this is not the actual physical barriers of China at the time. China at the time, they're going to, they're going to be larger, smaller over time, depending on the size of the dynasty, okay? But let's talk about some of the physical barriers they had before we get into the early dynasties, okay? So some of the physical barriers they had, to kind of the northeast, it's that they had the Gobi Desert, to the southeast, southwest, sorry, okay, so I gotta start that over. My directions are all over the place, okay? So looking at the map, to the northwest, west area, they have the Gobi Desert, okay, which is going to be a huge physical obstacle or barrier from large groups of people coming over, and is going to isolate them. To the southwest, going into closer to South Asia or India, you're going to have the massive Himalayan mountains, you know, huge mountain range, one of the large mountain ranges in the world, right? Okay, so that's going to be a huge physical obstacle or barrier. You're going to have rainforests to the southeast, Southeast Asia, and large mountain ranges, which is going to isolate them. And then you have an ocean to the east, okay? So China has all these massive barriers around them. So this is part of the reason that they will establish in relative isolation. Now, they will have contact with people, but these people will really be nomadic groups, okay? Nomadic groups that will be wandering around from place to place and will be dependent on the Chinese for some of the finer goods, okay? So think about what this would do to your psyche, okay? If you're the only established civilization you know, and the only other people you have contact with are wandering nomads, okay? Barbarians who smell like horse dung, who dress in animal hides, and have no written tongue, aren't sophisticated, don't have a social hierarchy, no job specialization, you're going to start to think you're pretty darn amazing, all right? Because you're going to think, wow, nobody else is like me, and the only people I'm having contact with are walking around and they smell bad and they depend on me for everything. So the Chinese developing in isolation, partially because of their physical barriers, and the only people they have contact with are these barbaric nomads, particularly, you know, in what will be like the Mongol steppes in Central Asia, is going to give them this mindset that they are the center of the world, or that no one is better than them. And that is going to be a huge part of their cultural beliefs really going through the centuries that we're going to reference back. And this is kind of the foundation of it. Let's talk about the topography a little bit, or what led to the isolation just a little bit. So like I said, they had the Gobi Desert, okay, one of the driest areas of the world, which is obviously going to be a huge obstacle, cutting them off from the Middle East, from South Asia. They have the Himalayan mountains, okay, so huge mountain range, which is going to cut them off, particularly from South Asia. And so the impact of this geography, what does it do to them? It creates these barriers that block them off from other cultures, and it isolates them and blocking them from cultural diffusion. So blocking them from Middle Eastern culture, blocking them from European culture, blocking them from African culture, and protecting them from invasion. So there's a positive and negative to these things, okay? And so it's really going to stamp their culture and really give them a strong foundation. But when down the road they do have contact, when it's time to aka play nice with others or blend cultures, the Chinese are going to have a hard time with this, okay? Because they're so used to being dominant and they're not used to culturally diffusing, where other cultures that are used to trading and culturally diffusing are already used to it, and it's an easier time. So this isolation that they're going to have will have pros and cons through history for them, for sure. It's going to really cement their beliefs and make it the center of their world. And truly they believe that they were the most sophisticated, most advanced things on earth. And they truly believe that the world revolved around them. And it's not hard to believe why they would get this concept, okay? They truly believe that they were the most important things on earth. Because again, like I said, if I'm the best thing I ever have contact with, and everything else I have contact with are, the joke this year is going to become the Mongols. Oh wait, we haven't gotten to the Mongols yet, or the Mongols are coming, or I don't know. There's just an obsession with the Mongols in world history, and part of that comes from the crash course videos, and just because, I don't know, there's just something about the Mongols. But if all you ever have contact with are Mongol-like people, okay, running barbarians who kill people and mumble and smell like horse dung and wear animal hides and things like that, you know, you're going to just kind of be like, wow, you know, pretty dang amazing, okay? You know, the bar is not set that high. Your sophistication level is going to feel pretty amazing, okay? And everyone else is going to seem pretty beneath you. And here's what the reality is going to be, newsflash, okay? As we go through history, they will be the most advanced civilized society for quite a long period of time, especially with technology, okay? Others will try to compete, but really till we get to the Renaissance and Westernization in the 1500s, no one is really going to be able to compete with East Asia. East Asia is really going to put a lot of technologies on the map, the printing press, gunpowder, fireworks, a lot of medical practices. The Chinese really are at the cutting edge of a lot of technologies that westernization is reliant upon, sailing technologies and things like that. So while some of this is an ego trip, some of it is, it's warranted because nobody really did compare to them. So when we're looking at a timeline of the dynasties, let's first talk about what a dynasty is, okay? For any of you who have parents who are into the old Zhou dynasty, okay, that's not quite what we're talking about. If you're going, what the heck is she talking about, then don't worry about it, okay? Okay, a dynasty is going to be a term that we will use kind of interchangeably, and a dynasty is just referring to a family, okay? So for instance, we're going to start at the Shang dynasty, so that third dynasty there on the timeline, and we're going to go through. There's, in fact, a song. It's called the Chinese Dynasty Song. There's so many dynasties in China. It's really impossible to keep them straight. Even myself, I've been teaching AP World History for 10 years. Oh my gosh, 10 years, crazy. Okay, you know, 2/3 of your life I've been teaching this, and it's still hard to keep track of it. Okay, so one of the things that I will offer later this year for extra credit is you singing the Chinese Dynasty Song. Yes, I'm going to make you sing. That's the first thing that will be embarrassing. And a Chinese dynasty song, yes, that's going to happen this year if you want extra credit. Some of you might say, I will never do that. I beg to differ. It's amazing what you guys will do for extra credit. The joke I like to give in class and stuff is that there's like a carrot and you guys are like the bunny rabbits. You guys are like, ooh, what will I do for the carrot? And you guys will sing for extra credit, okay? And here's the thing. First reason we do it, it is entertaining, so I won't lie, it is entertaining and it is good for a chuckle, but the most important reason and the second reason, most important reason other than entertaining is it is for your own good, because on the AP exam you need to know these dynasties and you need to know them in order and be able to keep track of them. So if you start talking about the Shang dynasty but you mean the Han, you're completely invalid, you know, just so you really need to know what a dynasty is and you need to know them in order. So first off, a dynasty is just referencing a family. So for instance, it says Shang dynasty from 1700 to 1027 BCE. That is not one person ruling China. That's a family, okay? So that's a series of people, like a monarchy kind of, okay? So one family ruling China. And when that Shang dynasty falls, and then what looks like Zhou, so Z-H-O-U, that's actually Zhou, like J-O-E, so it looks like Zhou, but it's pronounced Zhou. That is another family, okay? So another family that will control. And then we get to the Qin, then the Han. So these are families. So a dynasty is referring to a family. So many people rule, so live and die, but it's one family, okay? So I'm going to give you a taste of what the song sounds like, and then we're going to get into two of the dynasties in this chapter. We're going to talk about the Shang dynasty this chapter and the Zhou dynasty this chapter, and then we will be talking about many different dynasties in China, coming back to them. So here is the Chinese dynasty song. I'm sorry, I'm just going to rip off the band-aid and here we go, okay? Shang Zhou Qin Han, Shang Zhou Qin Han, Sui Tang Song, Yao Ming Jing Republic, Mao Zedong, Mao Zedong. Did I just blow your socks off? I know. My singing abilities are pretty incredible. And let me tell you, if you saw it live, I even do a little dancing routine. So sorry that you missed that. Maybe some of you are going like, thank goodness I'm not in front of her right now. So, okay, so you'll be hearing that song more. And if any of you have grew up with nursery rhymes, that was like Farajaka. Farajaka, or are you sleeping? And stuff. So it's just to that nursery rhyme, and it just makes it an easier way to remember. Okay. So like I said, in this chapter we're going to be looking at the Shang dynasty. So don't worry about the first two, the Neolithic and Xia. Okay. So Shang, and we're going to be looking at the Zhou dynasty. So the first dynasty is going to start in northern China, okay? And like the other early river valley civilizations, they established around rivers, okay? Water is the #1 essential to life, right? You have to have water. So it makes sense to establish around water. Why would you establish far away from water? Like if your #1 requirement. So like I said, they established themselves around river. Water is the #1 thing that you need to survive. And so all the early civilizations establishing around water is a no-brainer. It's the #1 thing. Have that resource readily available to you. So there's two major rivers that we're going to see the early Chinese establish around, okay? The Henghe River, which is going to be known as the Yellow River, so that's going to be to the north, and then the Yangtze River to the south, Okay, so the early Shang Chinese dynasty, the original dynasty, is going to be, now the reason we start with the Shang dynasty is because they're the first to have written records. So we believe that there were some earlier dynasties, but for this class you just need to know the Shang, okay? And they're going to start, you'll see some conflicting dates. So some say around 1700, some say 1750. The date range for this chapter, if you look at the very first page, so if you look at your chapter questions, you need to do the date range. 2200 to 500 BCE is the date range, right, for this chapter. Geographic location, you should be talking about East Asia, right, because it isn't physically China yet as we know it. You should be talking about Central Asia and stuff in this chapter for sure. Those are the two kind of regions that you should be talking about, all right? And then for key civilizations, you should be writing down the key dynasties that we're talking about. So the first one we're talking about is the Shang dynasty. So for key civilizations, you should be writing down the Shang as well if you haven't done that already, okay? So the reason we start with the Shang dynasty is because they were the first to really fit the definition of what a civilization is, okay? And one of those characteristics is having a writing system, staying in one place, and having an irrigation system, which we see them settle first around the Hunghe River, which is the Yellow River. They did have a writing system. Again, it was a symbol writing system. Here's an example of them writing on a tortoise shell. Most people, however, though, in Chinese culture could not write. So this was for the elite of the elite. Most people were peasants, they were farmers, and so there was no need to learn to write. This was a very elite thing to be able to learn to read and write. And really that was in a lot of the early civilizations. Most people could not read and write. Most people were laborers or specialized in their labors, but reading and writing was not a part of their skill set. Religious beliefs, okay, so the early religious beliefs of the Shangs, let's go over some of those, okay. They believed in veneration of ancestors. Let's be really clear what this is, because I always ask in class, okay, so what does veneration of ancestors mean? And people raise their hands, okay, and here's what somebody always says. They worship their ancestors. No, be wrong, okay? They did not worship their ancestors. Here's what it is. They prayed to their ancestors because they believed that their ancestors were the messengers to the gods. So they showed reverence to their ancestors, but they didn't worship their ancestors, okay? Chinese culture, something that's really neat about their culture is there's a real respect for elders, okay? And I personally believe that it's something that Western culture needs to adopt more of. I think that it's something that we could take a lesson in is having more respect and reverence for our elders in the way that they take care of their elders and the way that there's a real respect and reverence for their elders and wisdom that their elders have. But what we see in Chinese culture is even after they pass, okay, that reverence continues. And what they believed is that in order to get to the gods, okay, in order for their prayer, so if you're praying or you have, let's say you have worries, like things aren't going well, or you need a job or something like that, for those prayers to be delivered, okay, your ancestors were the messengers to deliver it to the gods. You had to show homage to your ancestors, to show respect to your ancestors in death. So by showing respect to your ancestors, they would honor your respect and they would deliver those messages to the gods. Okay, so they were like the messenger. So that respect for ancestors is not just in life, but also in death. All right, so veneration of ancestors, that continue respect for ancestors, that they are the messengers or the vessels to gods, but not necessarily that they themselves are gods or the worship of ancestors. So there's a difference there that you want to make sure that you know. Okay. They also believed in oracle bones, okay? So they used what would be known as like a shaman, okay? Who would interpret or ask questions, and they would use oracle bones or maybe a tortoise shell to interpret this. So what they might do is, so animal bones, they might take them and just shake them up like in a bag and throw them out on some kind of cloth or animal hide and then interpret them. Or a tortoise shell, what they might do is they might put it in some kind of fire, and then the way that it would crack from the fire, they would interpret those lines for different things of maybe your life or fertility or warfare or outcomes of your life or something like that. They believed in polytheistic gods. Okay, so just like the other pretty much all early religions were polytheistic. Monotheistic religions we'll get into later on, but polytheism was by far the dominant belief system, that many gods, there was a god for everything, and the gods were in nature, they were in every element. So So just like the other early civilizations I talked about, when it rained, it was a blessing. If you won in warfare, it was a blessing. If you lost in warfare, everything had symbolism. Nothing was just what it meant. Everything had alternate meaning. If you had children, you were blessed. If you didn't have children, that was a sign. Okay. Now we know today, like if a woman can't have a child or a man can't have children, we know that there's medical reasons for that. Back then, that was a sign that you did something wrong, or that you weren't blessed, or that God. There was religious interpretations in everything. Okay, if you lost a child, or if you lost a husband or a son, there was religious. If you lost a business, like everything had religious meaning. Can you imagine if you fell hard on your luck? I mean, not only you're falling hard on your luck, but now everybody's judging you and thinking, oh, the gods don't like you. I mean, it would be double hard, because everything had not just physical meaning, like I've fallen on hard times or I've lost a loved one, but religious meaning, and everybody else is judging you for that and holding that over your head. So it would be really hard. The Shang dynasty, like other early civilizations, had a class system. They had labor divisions, so they had job specialization, and they were very clear in their social hierarchy. Okay. Hunters and warriors were at the top of the aristocracy, and bronze, just like in the Middle East, was a status symbol. Okay, so this was the metal of the time. So we call it the Bronze Age because it was the main metal of the time, not only for weapons, but a status symbol for jewelry, for what little coinage there was, but artistry and things like that. So it was a status symbol if people had it. Bronze could be used for weapons. We do see some of our very first chariots also being used from the Chinese. This is part of the reason that we give them a lot of credit for being very advanced, because some of our very first chariots or horse and carriages actually come from or date back to the Chinese. So why did the Shang fall? Okay, so why did a dynasty that lasted for about 700 years, why did they fall? Well, I'm going to start to teach you that pretty much everybody falls for the same reasons. And here's why I want to teach you trends, okay? Because when you get to the AP exam, here's the reality. You're not going to remember every civilization. You're not going to remember every reason that everybody falls. But if you remember the general reasons why people fall, you can pretty much always hit the nail on the head because it's almost always for the same reasons, okay? Internal decline and then external conquer. Okay, and it almost always starts in that order. So if you look at the Indus Valley, like we talked about, like we don't know exactly why they declined the way they did. Why did they decline or what happened? Well, it's almost always for the same reasons. Okay, so what happened is they started to overtax. They led to famine. So here's what tends to happen. Okay, here's again the cycle, what tends to happen. Okay, you'll have a couple bad years of crops. So the rainfall falls short, and so the crop seasons are bad, which means we fall short on money. The peasants or the farmers fall short on money. Okay, that means the government is short on taxes. Okay, well, they don't want to change their lifestyle. Nobody likes to change their lifestyle. Nobody likes to cut the budget. Everybody likes to spend more money. Nobody likes to, if mom or dad loses their job or gets a pay cut, it always sucks when you all have to sit down, right, and be like, okay, well, we're making less money now, so we can't eat out as much, or we can't have that nice car, or we can't take that nice vacation. Nobody likes having those conversations. And we all know, whether you're a Democrat or Republican or wherever you are, we all know nobody likes to cut the budget, okay? The government never likes to cut the budget, right? We always complain when we have to cut spending, right? We always are for spending, but nobody likes to cut the budget. So it's not uncommon when times get tough. What does the government do? Raise taxes. Our government does it all the time. Oh, we need more money. We raise taxes. Well, who pays those taxes? The farmer, the people. Well, if I have less crops than I did 2 years ago, which means I have less to sell, I have less money to pay taxes. So I have less money to live off of. Now I have less money to pay taxes, and they just raised my taxes. So this leads to internal revolt because people are exhausted. So what was happening was the slaves were being overworked. They raised taxes. The government was spending too much money. So internally they were declining. There's famine because of bad crops. The government's overspending. The slaves are being overworked, and people in general are disgruntled, right? They're economically declining, okay? And then on top of that, what happens is that it makes them susceptible to outside invasion or for someone else to topple them, okay? You're willing to fight for your country when you believe in your country, right? When you're happy with your country, when you're upset with your country, when you feel like your government isn't standing up for you, when you feel like your government isn't doing what it's supposed to do, you're not willing to fight for your country, or you're less likely to defend that country, okay? And so it's the same kind of thing. When you have internal problems, it makes it easier for an outside entity or even an internal entity to take over, because people are less likely to defend or back that entity. And so this is the reason why the 700-year dynasty is going to come to an end. And so there will be a slave revolt that will back it, and then there will become internal fighting. The Shang dynasty, that family will lose control, and now you have a bunch of internal families and barbaric tribes fighting, trying to take over the civilization of China. After about 100 years of fighting, one family will come out on top, and that will be the Zhou dynasty. So it looks like Zhou, and you're probably wondering, why don't we just call it Zhou then? Okay, well, I don't have a super good answer for you on this. That you're going to notice some words in history, especially with some Chinese words or names and references and stuff. We Americans have found ways to completely butcher them, and I do not agree with it, but even in the book, this is how they pronounce it, okay? Yes, I look at it, it should say Zhou to me, you know, or something like that, but it is pronounced Zhou in English, so we will say Zhou dynasty, okay? So we go from the Shang to the Zhou dynasty. So here's the problem. You have a dynasty that is 700 years old. All of written record in China, all they've ever known is the Zhou dynasty. And how do you now, as the new family, you just killed what was left of the Zhou dynasty, or what was left of the Shang dynasty, sorry. Now you're the new dynasty. How do you convince the people of China that you're supposed to be in charge? How do you convince the people of China that you're supposed to take over, that they aren't, that you're supposed to be in charge, that the gods want you to be in charge? Because as far as everyone has ever known, for all of written record, it has only ever been the Shang dynasty. And maybe, you know, they weren't doing great and things weren't great, but still, that's all they've ever known. That's all they've ever known. And as far as they know, that's all the gods have ever wanted. So we're going to see the creation of a new incorporation of a new belief, the mandate of heaven. Now, you're going to want to make note of this. And this is also question number 1 off of your homework, right? What is the importance of the mandate of heaven in the transition from the Shang to the Zhou dynasty? And also in module 3, we're going to be using this question to teach you another type of homework. So mandate of heaven, this is also your primary resource. So, and it's all over the test, okay? Mandate of heaven is going to be used for every single dynasty all the way until the 20th century. So this concept you need to get familiar with, okay? Because it is a Chinese belief that is not going away, and anytime you're talking about Asian culture, East Asian culture, it is relevant. Every single dynasty uses it, okay? So here's what it is, okay? The Zhou dynasty had to find a way to legitimize their rule. How do you convince people that you're not just another tyrant taking over? How do you convince them that you are the legitimate rulers, okay? We've talked about this before. How do I make you believe that I'm not just a mortal man? Incorporate religion. We saw the Egyptians do this, right? The pharaoh wasn't just a pharaoh, he was a god, okay? In Mesopotamia, we saw that code of Hammurabi, right? That Hammurabi would incorporate religion with the rivers, right? If you threw them in the river was a god. So we see religion all the time incorporated into government beliefs. All the time, okay? So the Zhou dynasty is going to do this in another way. Okay, now they're not going to claim that they're a god. Here's what they do. They claim that they are the son of God, okay? That heaven is the chief god, all right? Has mandated a son, a physical son on earth to represent them, okay? So the mandate of heaven is the new dynasty. So the Zhou dynasty is the mandate of heaven. Heaven being the main god has mandated this new dynasty. Now, the big question, that's a simple concept to say, okay, so I can get up and say, I am a mortal man, so I'm not claiming I'm a god, but I have been chosen by God. So maybe not as powerful as a pharaoh who says he is a god, but that's still pretty powerful when somebody gets up and says, you know, I've been chosen by God, you know, or by one of the main gods. That's pretty powerful. People's like, oh, okay, yeah, you're still more important than the average Joe. no pun intended, than the Zhou dynasty. You know what I mean? You're still more important than the average, person you run into on the street. Most people can't turn around and say, yeah, I've been chosen by God to represent. That's pretty powerful. Now, I don't know about you and I. When somebody off the street, if somebody you saw on the corner was holding a sign saying, I need money and I am Jesus, I don't know about you, I would probably chuckle a little bit. You know what I mean? I'd be like, okay. You know what I mean? Like, that's probably not true. That's not true. You know what I mean? I mean, no offense to them, but we would probably chuckle. Okay. So most people, when they claim that they are chosen by God or chosen by a God, we're not going to believe them. Why? Because prove it, right? Prove that you are the Son of God. Prove that you are chosen by God. So here becomes the thing. How do you know that dynasty is the right dynasty, that the mandate of heaven, that heaven, the chief God, actually wants that king, the Son of God, to rule? So here's what it is. It's like a spectrum, okay? So imagine it's like an opinion poll. When things are going well, this is a sign. When you win at battle, when there's no famine, when the economy is going well, when they're fair, righteous rulers, when things are going well, the people are going to feel good. That's a sign from heaven, a sign from God that they're chosen. When things aren't going well, so famine, warfare, a plague, ooh, nothing like a plague, right, to send a bad message, outside invasion, maybe an earthquake, some kind of natural disaster to really send a bad message, that could be a sign from the gods that their favor has been lifted, okay? So the mandate of heaven was a way for one dynasty transition to the next. So the Zhou dynasty is going to create this as a way to transition. So the mandate of heaven is going to be used by every single dynasty. And then the question becomes, well, how do we know? Well, so first you have to win the dynasty, right? You have to fight for it and you have to win it. Then you claim it. I have the mandate of heaven. Then you have to live it out and the people have to believe it. And how do people believe it? Well, it's based on their quality of life. If things are going well, relatively speaking, so think about our own quality of life. 2020, if we had to put a mandate of heaven on 2020, well, how would we feel? Probably we would say the mandate of heaven is not good, right? There's a pandemic, things have not been going well, our economy's been shut down. Las Vegas has definitely hit us hard because we're such a tourism-driven, so if we were living in China and this was a mandate of heaven situation, we would be probably reading into this going, whoa, this is not good, this is not good, okay? So mandate of heaven is read by how things are going. And so governments would use this as a way to legitimize their rule, to back their rule, to empower their rule, to incorporate religion. And it's a really smart way to do it. It's a very powerful way to do it. So when you read your primary resource, when we do our live session, or if we've already done it, then you'll notice that it's a new ruler. So what it is, it's a new ruler in the Zhou dynasty, okay? And it's one of his chief ministers, so an advisor, telling him, here's how you have the mandate, okay? Here's how you show the people you have it. Here's how you get the favor of the people. Here's how you need to act. Here's how you need to be to ensure and continue the mandate. Now, not every ruler is going to do a good job at this. Some people are very selfish. Some people don't make very good decisions, Sometimes things don't go well, and you've got to try to, reprimand that or fix that. But the mandate of heaven is a way to try to combine secular and religious rule. So the Zhou dynasty is going to be from 1027 to 256 BCE. Okay, so before Common Era. So we're counting down. Okay, and the Zhou dynasty. So the Shang dynasty was kind of known as being the very first dynasty. So if you're going to take like a few notes on the Shang dynasty, they're from 1750 to roughly 1027. Okay, and if you had to make note of 4 or 5 things, what are they known for? They're the first civilization. They created a written record. They had the first settlements. They believed in oracle bones. They actually started silk. That was something that they did start, sorry, that I didn't mention before, and stuff. So Zhou dynasty. So what is the Zhou dynasty known for? If you're going to write down 4 or 5 things that they're known for, if you're going to take notes on them, okay? They are known for the mandate of heaven. That's a big thing that they're known for, okay? They created this to help with the transition from one dynasty to the next. How do you show the people that you are the next legitimate rule? How it's a combination of secular and religious rule, okay? And they did a really good job. Right away, they got to work and they proved that mandate for quite a while, okay? They showed advancements in technology. They continued on advancements with silk. they developed trade routes going into Southeast Asia, into Central Asia, into South Asia. The population is going to increase, famines will decrease, so they did a really good job of creating a crop system and then internal trade so that people were getting access to those crops and foods that they needed. The first coinage system, this was a big deal. They developed the first coinage system, okay? This was a really, really big deal. So the first coins actually had holes in them. You have to understand, clothes back then people didn't have pockets, and so the first coins had holes, and people would put a string through the coins, and then they would tie it into their clothes or around their wrists as a way to keep their coins, okay? Because they didn't have pockets to put them in. So the first coins you're going to see are going to have holes in them, so they could put them on a string and tie them into their clothing or around their wrist in some way. So that's another sign of being very advanced for their time. And you can see that their trade routes eventually are going to lead to what is known as the Silk Road. Okay, the Silk Road is going to be the major trade route. The next dynasty, or actually two dynasties from now, the Han Dynasty will be the ones that really establish the Silk Road. But the beginnings of the Silk Road will start under the Zhou Dynasty, which will be the connection of Asia to the Middle East. Okay, and the reason, anybody want to guess why it gets the nickname the Silk Road? That's right, because the major commodity traded was silk. Okay, the good majority of the trade was going east to west, so going from China to the Middle East, and that was because China had the best products. Really, for their time, they had the most advanced, best products of their time. So there's a lot of beliefs and practices in China that we're going to talk about. There's a lot of beliefs and practices within China that people like to say are religion, and actually that's not the case. A lot of the things we're going to talk about right now, they are philosophies, okay? And so let's first talk about what is the difference between a philosophy and a religion before we get into the philosophies, okay? The difference between a religion and philosophy is really one simple thing: deity or lack thereof, okay? What makes a philosophy a religion is having a deity, okay? The belief in an afterlife and having a deity or deities. Okay, what makes something just a philosophy is lack of a deity. Okay, it's not about an afterlife, it's just a philosophy of life. Okay, how we do something or approach something in this life. It can be a philosophy of a spiritual world, but there's no deity. Okay, so the difference between a religion and philosophy really comes down to deity or lack thereof. Okay, so what we're going to be looking at, three major Chinese philosophies. Okay. These, again, like Mandate of Heaven, are going to carry us all the way through. So we're learning about a lot of staples in China this chapter that are going to carry us all the way through. So we're going to reference them all the way through to modern history. Okay, so Mandate of Heaven we're going to reference all the way through, and then these three major Chinese philosophies: Confucianism, legalism, and Taoism. These are not religions, these are philosophies. These are ways of approaching life, or different philosophies of how to approach life. Now, all three of these philosophies really interesting enough. So Zhou Dynasty has a lot of things that come up during them. So Mandate of Heaven is created to help legitimize their rule, and these three major philosophies are created around the same time, which is 500 BCE. So I would make note of that. So circa 500 BCE. Circa is a word we like to use in history for meaning around about. It's give or take 25 years. So round about 500 BCE. So the Zhou Dynasty starts 1027 BCE, but round about 500 BCE, there was a warring period for over 100 years where the Zhou Dynasty, the Mandate of Heaven looked like it was slipping and things were not going well, and people thought that it was time that the Zhou Dynasty go. Now, no dynasty wants to leave, okay? So they were trying to hold on desperately, but there were several other families that were trying to take over. So it was a warring period because the Zhou Dynasty was still in charge, but it was internal chaos. You could say civil war, you know, internal chaos, craziness, internal just absolute chaos. And during this time, three major philosophies are going to arise round about the same time within China. Now, all three of them have the exact same goal. So I would write this down. Okay, here we go. And I would write this down on your PowerPoint or whatever you're taking notes on. All three of them have the exact same goal, and it's to do one thing: create an orderly society. So three philosophies equal the same thing: create an orderly society. Now, how to do it? Very different. So I would write Confucianism, skip a couple lines, legalism, skip a couple lines, Taoism, skip. In fact, actually, I would write them in a different order. Here we go. I would do legalism, then Confucianism, then Taoism. So I would do legalism, skip 2 lines, Confucianism, skip 2 lines, Taoism, skip a couple lines, okay? Because they're going to go from one extreme to the next. So legalism is the most extreme, Confucianism is what we could call the middle road, and Taoism is on the other extreme, okay? Now, all three want to do the same thing, create an orderly society. How to do that, go about it a very different way. The analogy that I give in class, the best way to do this is parenting, okay? All of your parents have the same goal. Okay, and that is for you to grow up and to be contributing members of society and to move out of their house and they don't have to pay for you anymore. Now, that might sound like an unloving way of saying it, but the reality is they don't want to pay for you till you're 60. Sorry, I know they love you, but they don't want to, okay? They love you, but when you're 18, 19, maybe 20, they would like you to move out to, now maybe your mom would like you to stay a little longer, but at some point they would like you to leave, okay? They would like you to be able to pay for yourself. That would be really nice. And they would like that to be not in jail. Fair to say, you know what I mean? Okay. If any of your parents have come to you and said, you know, I love you so much and my goal or belief for you or dreams for you is to go to jail, run. That's not good. No. And I'm sure that's not the case. Okay. I'm sure your parents love you so much and they want what's best for you. And so, but how they go about that is very different, right? How they've raised you, how they have nurtured you, how they discipline you, how much discipline they give you, what kind of boundaries they give you, their philosophy of how to raise a independent adult someday, which you're going to be here in 4 or 5 years, right? You're 15, you'll be 16 this year roughly, maybe some of you 14, you know, is a different way of doing this. So the goal is all the same. They want you to be an independent adult someday, here in just a couple years. Go off, maybe go to college, right? That's probably the first step, and then move out, you know, get a job. Like I said, don't commit crimes, you know, do it the right way, be contributing members of society. That's the goal, right? Now, how they've done that or are doing that are probably different. So think of it in the same way, okay? So the goal is to have an orderly society, not to have a warring period. Everybody's tired of the war. So how do we go back to an orderly society? Well, here we go. There's 3 major philosophies. And at the end, we'll talk about which one is the most practical. And I actually think that we can apply this even in modern day if you just take away some of the basic ideas and you think about it figuratively. First philosophy, let's talk about Confucianism. Confucianism is going to be the combination of the two, the middle road, okay, I would say, the down the middle, I would say, okay? So Confucianism was found by Confucius, okay, so that's where it gets its name, okay? It's concerned with social order, having a good government. The teachings were written in what was called the Analects, okay, and it was written by his students. Now, Confucius was actually a failed politician. He tried many times to become a politician. He failed, so he actually became a political advisor, okay, to people who were, to dynasty rulers and to people who were elite within dynasties. So what are the basic beliefs or teachings of Confucianism? So here we go. Okay, so these are some things that I would write down, okay? Filial piety. This one you need to know, okay? He uses the analogy of the parent-child relationship for the leader to the people. So here's what it's saying, okay? It's saying that the parents model behavior to the children. So if parents are firm but respectful to their children, the children will learn that behavior. So just as a parent should be firm with their kids, they need to have boundaries. So Confucius believes you do need to discipline your children, but you shouldn't beat your kids, you know. There needs to be consequences when your kids break the rules, but you shouldn't be, you know, beating them with a belt and, you know, slapping them across the face, you know, and stuff like that, but there needs to be discipline. They need to be grounded. Maybe, you know, when they're younger, I don't know, I don't know if a SWAT's appropriate, but, within reason, being humane but fair, okay? So in the same way, he's saying a leader, a ruler, needs to be very firm with their subjects, their people, but fair, okay? So having rules and laws, so ruling but not a tyrant, Okay, so filial piety is the respect that a parent models that then is important. So it's being in charge, but it's doing it in a way that is respectful. So it's kind of like if you have an animal, right? A dog, you know, if you've ever had a new dog, a puppy, right? They pee, they poop, they chew on things. You have to discipline. You have to teach them to go outside and go potty. Otherwise, your house is going to smell bad and they're going to chew up everything and it's gross. So you have to teach them. You can't beat the dog. That's not right. That's inhumane. So you have to teach them in a humane way how to act or how to do these things. And so it's a fine line of how to do that, right? Disciplining, but not being inhumane. And so filial piety is about that parent-child relationship, which is an analogy for a leader and its people. A ruler is responsible to provide for the government, and the people should respect that, okay? So you provide respect to the people, they will provide it back. You model the behavior, they will model it back. And they do say that, right? One of the biggest impacts on your life or models in your life are your parents. That's one of the people we learn the most from. They should be well educated. So he promotes that education is really important, that they have leaders and advisors around them to help educate them where they don't know everything. And that if we do this, everyone should accept their position. So it's really about acceptance. So if you are born into a farming position or something like that, you should accept that. If you are born into an elite position, that we accept our place. So if everyone accepts their place, this creates harmony. And if everyone shows respect for their place, respect for those above them, respect for those beneath them. So there is a social hierarchy and you show respect. And just because you're above doesn't mean that you disrespect those below, but you accept that and show respect, that the harmony of society will work. So it's about government, it's about rules, but it's about a balance and it's about humaneness, that you will have an orderly society. So it's a middle road, that you have to have rules, but you do it in a humane way. This is Confucianism. Okay, then you have the other end of the spectrum, legalism. Okay, so this was founded by Hans Phi, and this is really important. So Confucianism believes that people are naturally good. Okay, so with Confucianism, what they believed is that you want to foster the good. So how do you foster the good? You correct it when they do something bad, and by showing them respect, you foster the good. Okay, so if you're, let's say your parents, if you, a Confucius parent, if that was the philosophy that they took, let's say that if you cuss them out, you got really sassy with your mom, okay? They would correct you. They would say, you do not speak to me that way. That is not okay. And then they would foster. They would say, I hear that you're frustrated with me right now. What would be an appropriate way to talk to me? And then they would try to model that. Your mom wouldn't cuss you out and say, you don't beepity beep talk to me, beepity beep, you're a beepity beep, you know, and call you a bunch of names. That would demonstrate upping what you just did of the evil. Now, a legalist believes people are born evil. So the legalist believes the only way to create an orderly society is you have to outdo the evil within people. So to suppress the evil in people, you have to be so evil that you scare them into submission, okay? So to give you an example, this would be like a Hitler or a Mao or a Stalin or a Mussolini. I think about some of the worst rulers in history, El Chapo, you know, like, I mean, these people that rule, it doesn't just have to be political leaders. It could be, you know, like I said, drug organizations or something like that, you know, a mob boss, you know, people that rule with an iron fist, fear, okay, that create fear. So here's the gist of it. Same goal, to create an orderly society, but how do you get these people in submission? Confucianism says you do it through modeling respect. You foster the good in them, and that by modeling the respect and people accepting their place, they will return the respect. Okay, that's the philosophy. This one says, no, no, no. People are evil. So you have to be so evil. You have to suppress them, force them in. Kim Jong-un, Kim Jong-il, like North Korea, probably the best present example right now. You rule with an iron fist. You create so much fear, and you force people into submission. That's basically what it is. So take any kind of fascist leader, terror organization, and that's what you're going to have. Okay. So strict laws, harsh punishment, all right? And so you go to the extreme. So you're going to see most of the time physical punishment. So if you get out of line and you get home and your parent, you know, beats you, cusses you out, you know, that is legalism. It's going to an extreme to create that submission, to create the obedience that you want. And here's the thing you're going to see about legalism, okay, when we get into another chapter. Legalism works in that you get the results you want very quickly, but it doesn't last, okay? Anytime we see people or civilizations that go to an extreme, okay? And hear me out because I'm going to come back to this, okay? We're going to see one dynasty that practices this, the Qin dynasty, in another chapter. We'll look at this, okay? They last for less than 20 years. Legalism gets what it wants very quickly. It is very effective in getting the results it wants, but it doesn't last. When you look at Hitler, he had very, very clear ideology of what he wanted to accomplish, and he accomplished a lot of what he wanted to do, a lot of evil things. It was horrible what he did, but he did accomplish what he wanted in a short period of time, but it did not last. Thank goodness it didn't last. Legalism accomplishes a lot, but it never lasts because it's so extreme, because people can't take it. People can't take it, nor should they, you know, because it's so extreme. It is often, again, to the detriment. It often involves death because it's such harsh punishment. It's so extreme. And people can't take it, and it leads to revolt and then the overthrow of that tyranny or that government is usually how it plays out. So legalism, same result of creating social order, but it does it in such an extreme way of suppression of people that it rarely lasts, rarely lasts, okay? So you rarely see legalism last in a long-term situation, especially in a government situation. Does it rarely last? So what kind of leader do you want? It's not about education. It's not about advisors. It's about unquestioned authority. It's about do as I say. Again, it's, you know, Hitler did not have advisors around to question him. He had advisors around to say, yes, sir, and carry it out, right? Same with Stalin, carry it out. Unquestioned authority. Same within North Korea. You know, you are there to do their bidding. You are not there to question them. They don't show weakness. Weakness is bad, you know, so they are to be strong, no weakness, you know, and they believe you're naturally evil, so they must be more evil than you are. And again, the only dynasty we're going to talk about them next will be the Qin dynasty in another chapter, and they will be very, very short-lived. Okay, the last, so the other extreme, okay, is going to be Taoism. So Taoism, for lack of a better example, the best way to help you remember this is like the hippie movement, okay? This is like the make peace, not war. This is like, it's all good. Just everybody get along. If everybody just gets along, it's fine. So this was founded by Lao Tzu, okay? It emphasizes harmony with nature, improving oneself mentally, physically, redirection. So it's much simpler than Confucianism. It's about it's simpler in that it's less about work, it's less about government, it's more about the individual, okay? So the Taoists believe that if everybody just goes with the flow, so imagine a river. If you've ever been like to a creek or a river, have you ever tried to walk in the river? And if you're walking in the river, if you try to walk against the flow, right, it's really hard, and you get off balance, and you kind of, you know, you stumble and fall. But if you walk with the flow of the river, it's fairly smooth, right? And so think of the Taoists as going like with the flow, right? Just go with the flow, man. Like, don't resist. So it's about going with the flow of your life. Whatever comes, accepts it. So if you lose a job, okay. If you're supposed to do this, okay. If you just accept what comes, and if everyone just accepts what comes, then we'll be peaceful. Now, in theory, this sounds great, right? If everybody just accepts what comes, if everybody just goes with the flow, then there's no conflict. And if everybody just goes with the flow and there's no conflict, then the Taoist believes that we don't need as much government, we don't need as much law enforcement, we don't need as much legal system, we don't need as much infrastructure. So Taoists, they're not necessarily anti-government, but they don't see a purpose in government, because if everyone goes with the flow, we don't need authority, right? So they are, it's not that they're anti-government, they just don't see a purpose in government, okay? Now, you can imagine that this doesn't work on a large scale. So Taoism tends to be practiced on a personal level, and people can practice it on a personal level, right? This is harmony with nature. This is, you know, accept your fate, don't fight it. The Tao is the way, and stuff. But on a large scale, this doesn't work. Can you imagine as a leader, if you're just like, oh, okay, yeah, I would like everyone to not commit murder or to not steal. But if that was optional, you know what I mean? How quickly that, like, you know, I would like to be the leader. Well, somebody else wants to be a leader, they're just going to overthrow you. So from a leader perspective, this can't last. And you would have no authority, because it's really anti-authority, because you don't question things, or it's about just accepting things. So from a leadership authority, this doesn't really work. And so you don't actually see a dynasty practice this. This actually becomes more of an individual practice. So what it has in common with the other ones is its goal is to create social order. But where it doesn't actually work is on the larger scale, okay? So it's the go with the flow kind of hippie movement. It's an individual practice. And so I give you that example of the hippie movement or the water just to help you kind of see. So you have these three extremes, and Confucianism is kind of a balance of the two, right? It takes the Taoist idea of everybody accepting their place, going with the flow, but the legalist side of it, that you do need rules, but you don't go to the extreme of the harsh punishment. Okay, so a few other things that they believe in. Chinese culture is really about balance. You're going to see this as a theme in Chinese culture. So we see Confucianism as will be the most practiced philosophy through most of the dynasties. In fact, the only dynasty not to practice it will be the Qin dynasty. All the rest of the dynasties will practice Confucianism. And so you're going to see a real theme in Chinese culture of middle way, okay? Another thing you're going to see is yin and yang, okay? So yin and yang is about this, again, balance, this you needing both sides, okay? So yin and yang has many different references, male, female, sun, the shadow, the moon, and the sun, day, night, the seasons, the hot, the cold. And so it's the idea that we need a middle road, that we can't have any one extreme. If you only have men, or if you only have female, if you only have sun, or if you only have night, if you only have the moon, or if you only have summer, if you only have winter, as a society, we can't function. We need both. We need men, we need women. We need the sun, we need the night. We need the winter, we need the summer. We need both, and we need them in a harmony for our society to function at its best and to move forward. Okay, and what I love about these concepts is that when you look through history, China has some of the longest living dynasties, and during these dynasties they have some of the biggest technological advancements of their time, and it's through the middle road perspectives. And when you look at any societies that thrive for a long period of time, it's not because they go to, when I say thrive, I mean peaceful, I mean successful, I mean economically, technologically, however you want to define that, okay? Prosperity. It's not because they're extreme. It's not because everybody gets their way. It's not because you have a tyrant in charge. It's a middle road perspective. It's a balanced perspective. It's not all one way. It's a balanced perspective that they have to take. And the Chinese, this middle road perspective, this Confucius, a bit of both, this yin and yang, this middle road balanced perspective is really a theme that we're going to see in Chinese culture. So patriarchal society is definitely going to be a theme. So women will decline in their status, just as we saw in other early civilizations. So as they become more dominant, women unfortunately will decline. So men, it's definitely a patriarchal society. Confucianism is definitely about a patriarchal society, for sure. And we're going to end on the dynastic cycle again. So the dynastic cycle is really the cycle of the dynasties, okay? It's the rise and the fall of dynasties. So have you ever heard the concept, what goes up must come down? And that is any civilization. No one civilization is going to last forever. It just doesn't, and it just hasn't. Even the Roman Empire that lasts for over 1,000 years, and we'll talk a little bit about through history and stuff, they can last for a long time, but nothing lasts forever. It just doesn't. So even the dynasties. So the cycle is that they rise, they see the new dynasty comes in, they restore peace, they have loyalty, they give land to the peasants, they build up, they build walls, they have several generations of prosperity, things go well, but then like anything, they start to neglect, they start to ignore the corruption, they start to lose control, heavy taxation, famine, things within their systems start to fall apart. They start to lose the mandate, right? Other problems, like I said, signs of the mandate being withdrawn, floods, invasion, these other things that can be signs to people. And then a new dynasty can come in and topple them and claim the mandate, and the cycle will go on. Okay, and so we'll see many different dynasties, and the mandate of heaven is what facilitates the dynastic cycle. Okay, the last thing I want to touch on really quick is just look at the last question really quickly in in your questions, and it says, what were some of the reasons for the nearly simultaneous collapse of several civilizations in the Middle East and Mediterranean during the late Bronze Age? I want you to look in your outline. So if you look at the Chapter 3 tab or page in Module 3, the outline is going to have some really helpful hints to that. Also, if you look in the PDF of the chapter, the very end of the chapter, there's going to be a section on that. Basically, it's going to be the same reasons that the Indus Valley collapses, okay? There was an interdependence amongst them that they traded, so when one collapses, the others will eventually collapse. It's kind of like my dependence on the grocery store, you know what I mean? If the grocery store collapses, I'm eventually going to collapse because I'm dependent on the grocery store for a lot of my supplies and my needs, or if I'm dependent on the gas station for gas, then my ability to drive to and from work, so that's interdependence. Competition, you know, warfare, so taking one another out, is going to be a problem. And then population, you know, displaced population is going to be a problem. So there's going to be the threat to one another, the interdependence that they're going to have, and then invasion that is going to be a part of that. So I want you to kind of take a look at those things as you outline that response and make sure you have at least 3 or 4 points that you're making. So sorry this was kind of a longer lecture, but I decided to do it in one long lecture of an hour instead of breaking it up into 2, okay? And then again, make sure that you go to those live sessions for the SOAPs and that your questions are at least 5 sentences, college level sentences, before you submit them, and go ahead and send me any messages if you have any questions, okay? Have a great day.